Namaskar, everyone. I am Abhinav Agarwal, your host for today's Indica Books Q&A. And we do these author interviews roughly every 2 weeks. And I can tell you, this is by far the one that I've been looking forward to the most and I'm most excited about. Our guest today is Padma Shri awardee Professor Meenakshi Jain. And she needs no introductions, but I will be letting go of a wonderful opportunity to talk about her if I were not to do a formal introduction. So Meenakshi ji is now a senior fellow at the Nehru Memorial Library. And she has very recently been awarded, as you would have seen in newspapers and elsewhere, the Padma Shri for her contributions to Indian history by the President of India. She was for many years a professor of history at Delhi University, and she comes from an equally illustrious family. She is the daughter of the late Shri Jain, a distinguished journalist and the editor of the Times of India for many years. Every single one of Meenakshi ji's books have been a treasure to read. They have been encyclopedic in the amount of effort that has gone into putting together in a format that is accessible and understandable for the lay reader like us. Starting with many years back, her book Parallel Pathways, that was path-breaking, I would say, in many of the aspects that it revealed to us. This was followed by a series of books on collected accounts of travelers to India over the millennia. The India this came out in 4 volumes, and then in 2014, she wrote and published Rama in Ayodhya, which for the first time detailed the historical evidence, literary evidence, epigraphical evidence, sculptural evidence of Lord Sri Rama in India and outside of India. But more importantly, I believe, in my opinion, what opened our eyes for a lot of us was how she took the testimony of these so-called leftist eminent historians in the Allahabad High Court case. The judgment that ran into thousands of pages had the verbatim testimonies of these historians who came and delivered their testimony under oath. It was something that I don't think a lot of these historians had counted upon in getting their lies and the sheer lack of evidence that they had to present in their favor be exposed to the whole wide world so brutally and so methodically. Her next book, Sati, in my mind, again, it showed to the rest of us that how successful atrocity literature has been and how it was applied almost 200 years ago and became the template for future applications of this so-called atrocity literature to demean, defame, denigrate, and demonize Hinduism. After that followed the Battle for Rama, that added even more information about the temple at Ayodhya. This was followed then by the Flight of Deities that chronicled the accounts of the destructions of Hindu temples across hundreds of years in India and the efforts and the resistance put forth by Hindus across the length and breadth of the land in preserving and in trying to restore their places of worship that had been desecrated and destroyed. This latest book, Vasudeva, Krishna and Mathura, is unsurprisingly a book that brings to us in one collection, in one volume, all the different aspects of Vasudeva Krishna that we should be aware of, starting right from the Vedic literature, going into the early centuries of the millennia, then covering the medieval period, and very, very fascinatingly so, the legal history around the land as well as the efforts made by different parties to either preserve the land and that area, or by people to subvert the legal judicial process and to lay claim that never existed in the first place. So with that, on behalf of Indica Books and Indica, Meenakshi ji, a warm, warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored that you're taking the effort to host this.
My pleasure. Anytime, always. Let me start with this question. So, the historicity of Vasudeva Krishna should not be a matter of debate. However, it has even that has been thrown into doubt. And even if we go a few thousand years before that, we find that there are mentions of a Vasudeva in the Vedic texts, in the Upanishads also.
Yes, it's very interesting that you asked this question, because till the mid-20th century, there was no debate, academic debate, on the historicity of Lord Krishna. All the eminent historians of India, like D.C. Sirkar, H.C. Ray Chaudhary, and so many others, and also foreign Western scholars, they were agreed that there was a historical person known as Krishna. And they said that the earliest reference that we get to Krishna in the sacred literature is in the Chandogya Upanishad. The Chandogya Upanishad has been placed around 9th, 8th century BCE. These dates are not firm, but at the moment, that seems to be the accepted date, more or less accepted. So the Chandogya Upanishad says Devki Putra Krishna. Now it very specifically states that Krishna is the son of Devki. And it says that this Devki Putra Krishna, he was a disciple of Angiras. So it gives the name of the teacher also. And further, it also gives us information on what Devki Putra Krishna learned from his teacher. And scholars of Indian religion, they have noted that what Krishna learned from his teacher is more or less what was stated in the Upanishad as his teaching to the world. This is the earliest reference that we have of Devki Putra Krishna.
And you also write that the word or the name Devki is somewhat uncommon.
Yes. And then the next wonderful evidence that we have of Krishna comes from Panini. Now, Panini, we know, was a grammarian and a Sanskrit scholar. And his text, the importance of his text is that it is the work of one author. Unlike the Mahabharata, etc., which we know has grown with so many people working on the text, so that original text has grown over the centuries. Panini's Ashtadhyayi is only attributed to him. So according to scholars like Vasudev Sharan Agarwal, it has the same validity as an inscription. And Panini writes that I am giving the rules of grammar. So according to the rules that he gives, if two names are mentioned at one go, the smaller name will always come first. But Panini himself says there is one exception to my rule. And that is when you talk about Arjun and Vasudeva, you will use Vasudev's name first and then Arjun's. And why will you do that? Because he says Vasudeva is the worshipful one. This is the word that he uses. So, Panini, Chandogya Upanishad, they never knew that their writings will be subject to this kind of scrutiny in the 20th or 21st century. They wrote what was the accepted wisdom at that time and what they saw and heard.
And Panini, we can date to the 5th or 6th century BCE.
Yes. So about 300 years after Chandogya Upanishad. And one more literary evidence that I want to cite is Patanjali. Patanjali wrote on the grammar of Panini. But in Patanjali's Mahabhashya, Professor Bhandarkar, who has studied this text in great detail, he has from that work of Patanjali taken out 7 episodes, which Patanjali talks about, which are connected to the life of Vasudeva. So according to Professor Bhandarkar, it is very clear that stories about Krishna's life were very well known in the time of Patanjali, and they had been current for long before Patanjali. So these are some of the evidences, early evidences that we get. And one more thing I want to say, when we talk about evidences, we'll come to more evidences later, we always have to keep in mind that India was subjected to numerous invasions. So whatever, we cannot expect, full inscriptions. Everything that we have got has been damaged, desecrated, or is in bits and pieces because of the course of our historical journey.
So this, this brings us from the Vedic times to essentially the first few hundred years before the Common Era.
Yeah.
You then also quote Arthashastra as having, and Arthashastra is not a religious text in that sense of the word. It's a purely, socio-economic text. And Arthashastra mentions, among other people, it mentions, Krishna. So this leads us to, okay, so the question now is that, so Vasudeva Krishna is a historical figure on which there should be no debate. And as you said, till the middle of the previous century, there was really no debate over that. It was a settled issue. There's the other thing that you talk about, which is the merging of or the association of Vasudeva Krishna as a historical person with the divinity of Bhagavat or Vishnu and Narayan.
But before I come to that question, I just want to clarify that historians of the 19th century and mid-20th century, they never questioned this because according to them, all the evidence seemed to point to a historical figure. Okay. Second point is that even in the previous era, that is before Common Era, we have the account of Megasthenes. Megasthenes was the Greek ambassador to the court of Chandragupta Maurya. And he writes in his book, only fragments of that book have survived. But the portions that have survived says that Krishna, the devotees of Krishna used to live in Mathura, and they also controlled Mathura and Gokul. And in the 1st century Common Era, we have a Roman historian, Quintus, and he writes on the histories of Alexander the Great. And he says on the accounts of some of the people who were contemporaries of Alexander, I have learned that when the army of Porus marched against Alexander, they carried an image of Krishna, whom they used to call Hercules. And he says that the reason why they carried this image was because it would motivate all the soldiers to fight with as much courage as they could, opposing the Greek army. So these are two accounts, again, well before the present controversies broke out about behalf of Krishna. Now, you asked me that question of merging. You see, this is a very marked trait in the Indian character and civilization, that they reject nobody and they assimilate and elevate everybody. So Krishna, he was, according to the popular belief, he was a Yadav. He belonged to the Vrishni clan. All right. So one way of looking at it is that he was not a Vedic god. But in Vedas, we have the reference to Vishnu. And later on, we remember Krishna as a Gwala, a lover of cows, So scholars who have studied this phenomena have actually traced how Vasudeva Krishna, over a period of centuries, amalgamated all these traditions and became Vasudeva Krishna. So the most popular form of Krishna, Vasudeva Krishna, that we know today is the cowherd Krishna. We know about his the gopis, we know about his killing of Kans, we know all those stories, and Kaliya Mardan and all that. So, but actually this was, the cowherd Krishna is supposed to be the deity of the cowherd community of Abhiras. So you just imagine how the merger is taking place, that on the one hand you have the Vedic Vishnu, then you have Vasudeva Krishna, you have Narayan, the cosmic god Narayan, and you have Krishna Gopal, all over a couple of centuries amalgamating to become the Krishna that we revere today. So no form of worship was regarded as inferior. And if you look at any aspect of it, and this is a phenomenon that occurs again and again in Indian culture and civilization, that you uplift and elevate everybody. There is no distinction, there is no exclusion. That is the striking feature of our culture.
So let me now come to chapter 5, where you have the epigraphic evidence, and you begin the chapter by writing, and this to me was absolutely stunning. You write, and I'll quote, "The earliest epigraphic reference to the cult of a Vaishnav deity found so far comes from Beshnagar. The Garuda pillar inscription on a column mounted with an image of Garuda was erected in honor of Vasudeva by Heliodorus of Takshashila, and the inscription has been dated to the first half of the 2nd century BCE.
Yes.
And this site was twice visited by Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. And during the excavations, a sculpture of Vishnu was also found.
Yes.
And when John Marshall, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India from 1902 to 1928, wrote his report in 1908, the Heliodorus column was still smeared with vermilion by pilgrims, which meant that literally generations upon generations had been visiting and treating that as a place of worship. And this was followed about a few years ago by excavations by Dr. D.R. Bhandarkar. But I'm not all this is barely scratching the surface of the significance of what is also known as a Heliodorus column. Please tell us something more about this.
Now, this Heliodorus column, it's still standing there at Vidisha, at Besnagar. Anyone can go and see it. And it's remarkable that it has really, stood the test of time, as one may say. So this column, as you said, it was erected by the Greek ambassador to the court of an Indian king. Now, again, you have said that this column was smeared with vermilion, which means that over thousands of years, it had been worshipped. And in fact, when the British archaeologists came, the coating on the pillar was so thick that it failed to see the inscription beneath the. And it was only Lord Lake who came later and who excavated. He just scratched a bit of it and found the inscription. Now, what is so important about the inscription, apart from the fact that it is the first inscription which refers to Vasudeva, the inscription is in two parts. The first part of the inscription tells us who erected the inscription. He says, I came from here in this year to erect this, I'm ambassador of this king, etc. That is the factual inscription. But the second part of the inscription is fascinating. It quotes two verses, two lines from the Stri Parva of the Mahabharata. Now, that is fascinating. Does it mean that Heliodorus was familiar with the Mahabharata before he came to India? And the answer to this lies in the Mahabharata itself. The Mahabharata says that Vyas instructed that the Mahabharata be first recited in Takshashila. That is from where Heliodorus came. And so, according to the Mahabharata itself, the Mahabharata was first recited in Takshashila, and then from those people who heard the recitation, went to their respective homes and recited it over there. So this is the significance of the Heliodorus column. But Abhinav, one more thing I want to say, that near this inscription, another inscription was found, which was just a few decades later than this. And that inscription says we are also erecting a column for Vasudeva, and they use the word Prasadottam, the best of temples. That word has survived of that inscription. That means that in the 2nd century BC, around Vesnagar, another temple was being erected, and it uses the word, they say it's the best of temples. Now, just one more thing, I don't want to, burden your viewers too much, but when excavations were conducted by Dr. Khare of the ASI, he found the base of a temple. And that picture is there in my book. And he found evidence of 9 pillars. So 9 pillars were erected in front of the temple of Vasudeva. And, the top part of a makar and a palm were found, not the columns. Makar and palm are the symbols of Sankarshan and Krishna's eldest son, Pradyumna. So that means the entire family, it's possible that the entire family was represented over there.
And you talk about them as the Panchavrishnis,
Yes.
who used to be, worshipped, and then over a period of time, Krishna Vasudeva became the primary among those Panchavrishnis. And very interestingly enough, you also mentioned some historian who said that no, this cannot refer to the Panchavrishnis of the Mahabharata. This refers to some Buddhist, people.
Yeah.
Why would someone make such a claim that is untenable based on all the evidences we have?
That claim has not been accepted by anyone, and it has been rejected outright. And I've given the reasons for that rejection in my book. So the point to note is that in the early phases, Sankarshan was placed number 1 among the Vrishnis because he was Krishna's elder brother. As Krishna's stature grew, then he became number 1 of the Vrishnis, and Sankarshan became number 2, then Pradyumna, Anirudh, Samba, the other 5 Vrishni followed.
So let me now come to a slightly troublesome period of history. And this is, logically, I thought that the book could be divided into 4 parts. The first 2 we have covered. The third one is the medieval period where you have the 8th chapter that begins, the title is Katra Keshavdev attacked again and again. And you start off by describing in 1071 and Mahmud Ghaznavi's attacks at Mathura over a period of 21 days. And this is during the course of his 9th invasion of India. And you write that all Buddhist, Jain and Hindu shrines in and around Mathura were destroyed. Buddhism never recovered from the assault, and for the next 4 centuries, any Jain or Hindu shrine constructed was demolished. The memory of those temples and their transformation into mosques was preserved in oral traditions and in many modest shrines built from sculptural fragments. So tell us something about this particular affinity that these invaders had for Katra.
Can I just give 2 sentences on the antiquity of Krishna worship in Mathura? Because that will connect.
Yes, please.
So the thing is that even for Mathura, we have epigraphic evidence. So I just want to reiterate that I'm not adding anything from my side. All that I'm saying can be verified by you or by any of your viewers, because all this material is available. Now, these inscriptions that I'm going to talk about, found at Mathura, they were found in the time when the British were in the archaeological survey. They were the Alexander Cunningham, Fruher. These are the people who found, and the early these inscriptions were also deciphered by people like R.P. Chanda, of that kind of thing. So again, I'm saying that what we have found at Mathura is only not even a fragment or not even a fraction of what would have been there. As you said, Mathura was attacked again and again. So it is just sheer luck that 2-3 inscriptions or several inscriptions have been found in a fragmented condition, but at least they've been found. So the first inscription that we have is of around 15 Common Era. That is more than 2000 years ago. And that inscription is known as the Vasudeva door jamb. Now, door jamb means it's part of a door. And Vasu is the person who's erecting that. A person named Vasu is erecting that in honor of Vasudeva. Now, that inscription is also in fragments. But what is important is that that inscription says, I'm erecting this structure at the Mahasthan of Vasudeva. Now, this word Mahasthan is not an innocuous word, because Mahasthan means great place. So that means that in early Common Era, this area was identified in a very special way with Vasudeva Krishna. What was that special way? We cannot be certain. We can speculate it could be regarded as his birthplace, or it could be regarded as a place where an important event of his life took place, like the killing of his uncle Kans. We don't know. But the inscription says Mahasthan. And the next inscription that we have is just a few decades later. It is called the Mora Well inscription. This Mora Well inscription, again, fragment of it has survived, and it says that a stone structure, it specifies a stone structure is being constructed for the 5 Vrishni heroes. Because Mathura was the homeland of the Vrishnis. Krishna's father was the chief Mukhya of this place. So it says we are erecting a stone structure for the 5 Vrishni heroes. And it's very surprising that in 1911, Alexander Cunningham, whom we mentioned earlier, excavated this area, and he found 2 male torsos, and a little later a female torso was also found. The female torso had an inscription at the base, but the 2 male torsos had nothing to identify them. I am not saying this, but art historians, very reputed and respected art historians, have speculated that these 2 torsos could belong to Vasudeva and his brother. And the female could be their sister. So now we can come to destruction of, because after this we have many more inscriptions from Mathura. That in parts, one inscription is in Lahore Museum. That is of Chandragupta of the Gupta dynasty. That is also little part of it has survived, but he says, I am Param Bhagavad, the great devotee of Vasudeva. So now we can come to the destruction.
So among the destructions, there is the temple built at Katra was, you write, destroyed by Qutubuddin Aibak, the general of Muhammad Ghori, who reigned from 1351 to 88. So this is already, now we are in sort of the second round of destructions. The first one that was started in the 11th century.
But you have missed out one step. Mahmud Ghaznavi destroyed the temple. His court historian has given a vivid description of that. But the thing is that within a century, a person known as Jhajja,
right,
he builds what he says as a big temple. And how do we know that? Because again, part of the Mathura Prashasti has survived, in which he says that he has built this temple. So that old story of, smash, but then the others rebuild, it replays in Mathura also. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Qutubuddin Aibak, Farishta mentions, mentions Firoz Tughlaq and Sikandar Lodhi.
And the grandest temple that if I have read this correctly, that was ordered to be demolished by Aurangzeb was the one built by Bir Singh Dev Bundela.
Yeah.
He built, you write, the Keshav temple at a cost of an enormous 33 million rupees, which is 3 crore 30 lakh rupees, when gold was priced at 10 rupees per tola. And travelers during the time of Jahangir and all saw the temple, and they have described the temple and the magnificent idols out there. Then you have Aurangzeb.
So can I just intervene
yes,
for a minute?
Please.
So this, Bir Singh Bundela, he was a prince of Orchha, the kingdom of Orchha. But his father did not make him his successor. His father made Bir Singh's elder brother the future king of Orchha. And that upset Bir Singh greatly, and he wanted to be the ruler of Orchha. At that time, Prince Salim is the future Jahangir. He had revolted against his father, and he tells Bir Singh that, Abul Fazl is coming from the Deccan. He's going to pass your kingdom before he reaches Agra. So if you behead him and send me his head, when I become emperor, I will make sure that you become king of Orchha. So Bir Singh does that. When Abul Fazl is passing through Orchha on the way north, he has him executed and sends the head to Jahangir. Now this entire deal is recorded in detail by Jahangir himself in his Tuzuke-Jahangir. And then Bir Singh becomes the ruler of Orchha. And when he becomes ruler, he builds this grand temple that you have mentioned. And among the foreign travelers who saw this temple was Burnia and Javania. And they said many miles distance it could be seen.
Correct. And let me read a few passages from the book. So this temple that Aurangzeb ordered to be destroyed, in 1871, Cunningham excavated and who surveyed that site. To give everyone a sense of how large that site was, he says that trying to find. Okay, yes. So he writes that the temple, and I'm not talking about the compound of the temple, I'm talking about the actual main temple structure itself. He writes that the temple must have extended a total length, it would have had a total length of 250 feet with a breadth of nearly 72 feet, and the building being no less than 25 feet above the ground. Judging from these dimensions, Cunningham writes, the temple of Keshav Dev must have been one of the largest in India. And it is also said that this temple was the shikhar of the temple was so high that it could be seen from Agra, which is, I don't know, it's a distance of a good 40, 50 kilometers away. And this was an eyesore for Aurangzeb, who in 1669, Aurangzeb issued a general order for the demolition of Hindu schools and temples, and in 1670, specifically ordered the destruction of the Keshav Dev temple. Saki Mustaid Khan recorded the event, and he writes that on its site, a lofty mosque was built by the expenditure of a large sum. Now, this is painful, but I still have to read this. He wrote, the idols, large and small, set with costly jewels which had been set up in the temple, were brought to Agra and buried under the steps of the mosque of the Begum Sahib in order to be continuously trodden upon. The name of Mathura was changed to Islamabad. This and the temple was, so what happened after that, in 1670, after the temple was, of Keshav Dev was destroyed?
Yes. Then in 1707, Aurangzeb died. I'm just giving you the facts which are verifiable. I'm not speculating. I'm not conjecturing. So I just want to give what I know. There may be many gaps in my knowledge, and I'm sure they will be filled up once the subject becomes, popular subject and there's a debate on this. So in 1707, Aurangzeb died. After 1670, there was the Eidgah put over there, as you say. After that, we don't know what happened at that site. There is some speculation, which I've discussed in my book, but I won't like to discuss it here. In 1707, Aurangzeb died. And the next bit of news that we get is in 1770. In 1770, the Marathas, they acquire control when they're expanding from the Deccan northwards.
Right.
They acquire control of Mathura and Agra. So what they do is that they declare this area as Nazur land. This area means Katra Keshav Dev. They say it is government land. And when the Marathas occupy this area and they say it is government land, then the people who are in the mosque, those who used to give the call for the prayer, they leave. So they actually vacate that area and they say, we will go and search for our livelihood somewhere else. So from 1770, they leave. In 1803, the East India Company defeats the Marathas, acquires control, and it continues their policy of treating this as government land. So in 1803, it continues. So from 1770 to 1803, it is government land and there's nobody there because the Muezzins have left. Now, in 1815, the East India Company sells this entire Katra Keshav Dev. When we talk of Katra Keshav Dev, we mean 13.37 acres of land. That 13.37 acres is sold entirely to Raja Patnimal of Banaras. Subsequently, after Raja Patnimal, his descendants are also registered as the owners of Katra Keshav Dev. So the ownership of Katra Keshav Dev in the family of Raja Patnimal is not disputed in any British record from 1815 on.
And before I get into the current situation over the last 100+ years of repeated legal challenges and all, I want to write about the last piece of invasion and desecration that happened in Mathura, which was in 1757 when Ahmad Shah Abdali invaded India. And he specifically set up camp near Agra and Mathura. And his record is on Mathura and Vrindavan is recorded in what you call by a person who was part of the camp. And he describes this again. I would caution listeners, this is somewhat disturbing. He chronicled, and this fellow is Ghulam Hussain Samin, and Samin was present at the invaders' camp near Agra and Mathura. He chronicled Abdali's offer to his troops of a reward of 5 rupees for every infidel head they brought. And now you have quoted from his actual memoirs. I'm going to read a few sentences. One horseman mounted a horse and took 10 to 20 others, each attached to the tail of the horse preceding it. So these are soldiers of Abdali's army who are proceeding towards the town on one horse and carrying 10 or 12, 20 horses behind them. When they came back after sunrise, he writes, every horseman had loaded up all his horses with plundered property, and atop it rode the girl captives and the slaves. The severed heads were tied up in rugs like bundles of grain and placed on the heads of the captives. An order was given to carry the severed heads to the entrance gate of the chief minister's quarters, where they were to be entered in registers and then built up into heaps and pillars. Then, in accordance with the number of heads he had brought in, received after they had been counted, 5 rupees a head from state was given to each man. Then the heads were stuck upon lances and were taken to the gate of the chief minister. It was an extraordinary display. It was a marvelous state of things, the slaying and capturing, and no whit inferior to the last day of judgment. And he continues and writes that when Shah entered the neighborhood of Mathura, wherever you gazed, you beheld heaps of the slain. You could only pick your way with great difficulty owing to the quantities of bodies lying about and amount of blood spilled. At one place we reached, we saw about 200 dead children lying in a heap. Not one of the dead bodies had a head. I saw a number of Bairagi and sannyasi huts huddled close together. In each hut lay a severed head with the head of a dead cow applied to its mouth and tied to it with a rope around its neck. It is numbing after one point to read account after account of the destruction, death, and the goriness that was perpetrated. And yet let's leave that aside. You towards the last chapters, you basically talk about the conflict as recorded in the judicial records, and you talked about that in 1770 when the Marathas took control, they declared as Nazul land, and more than 6 decrees were passed in 1875 and 1877 in favor of Rai Narsingh Das, heir of Raja Patnimal. Now, let's talk about a little bit in brief about the legal challenges that were mounted and what was the result of each one of these legal challenges, from 1920 and all you write.
See, as I told you that when the Marathas, after the Battle of Govardhan, this entire area they declared as government land, and the Maulvis, they left that place. When they came back, it's not possible for me to say on the basis of the information that I have right now. But after the sale of land to Raja Patnimal, we find a group of people challenging the sale, and they go to the extent of falsifying records. And they say that this is not Katra Keshav Dev, its name is Katra Idka. And then they say Krishna Chabutra is actually Tehkhana. And they make all these claims and they appeal to the Mathura district court. Now, every case that they file is rejected by a succession of judges. There is no case that they win. And in every case, the judge says that the record is there before us. Even the water bills, the compensation for the railway line that was given, all these are in favor of Raja Patnimal and his successor. The tenants who are there, they are paying rent. You have no claim whatsoever. And in fact, the courts were very critical of the attitude of these people, and they said you are behaving like hardened litigants. These are the words that the court uses. So there is not one case that they have won from the time that they first appealed to the British courts. And there was a succession of judges that heard these cases, and each judge was very harsh in his observations on this party. So this is the situation that was there till the time of independence. Just before that, in 1944, Raja Patnimal's heirs sold the entire 13.3 acres to Seth Jugal Kishore Birla. So Jugal Kishore Birla became the owner of this entire 13.37 acres. I want to say that right from the time that we have documents, the entire Katra Keshav Dev belongs to either Patnimal and his family, or it is sold to Jugal Kishore Birla. It is never fragmented. And then, of course, we all know that Jugal Kishore Birla creates a trust for the construction of a grand Krishna temple.
Correct. And there were 3 people to whom this this trust, this land was transferred to you, right? One of them was Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, and there was Goswami Ganesh Dutt and Dr. Atre in 1944. Now, something happens in 1968.
Now, I want to clarify that I have evidence only till the creation of the Shri Krishna Janm Bhoomi Trust created by Birla for the construction of a grand temple. After that, whatever is written in my book is on the basis of a case that was filed in September 2020 by lawyer Vishnu Jain and his father. And if you look at that document, then you will see that it's a long document. It was not possible for me to reproduce that document. And in any case, it's easily available. In that document, they make startling claims. So what I've written on this case is based solely on the case that they have filed, Vishnu Jain and his father have filed in the Mathura court. Now, what have they said? They have said that Jugal Kishore Birla created the Shri Krishna Janambhoomi Trust in 1950. They say at some point another trust enters the picture. That is Shri Krishna Janamsthan Seva Sangh. Now there is no clarity in my mind, at least, when this Seva Sangh was created, who created it, who were its members. Vishnu Jain has provided some documents which can be examined by anyone interested. Now, according to Vishnu Jain, this Seva Sangh had no locus standi as far as Katra Keshav Dev was concerned. That Katra Keshav Dev was belonging to a trust, Shri Krishna Janambhoomi Trust, which was created by Jugal Kishore. Who created this trust, Seva Sangh, when it came into existence, I cannot answer that. But what is most surprising is that according to this case that Vishnu Jain has filed, in 1968, this Seva Sangh entered into an agreement with the Idgah party and gave 3 acres of Katra Keshav Dev to the Idgah party. Now, this is something which is beyond my comprehension. If I own the whole plot, if I own my own whole house, and the courts have said again and again, you're the sole owner, and the court records are there which say I'm the sole owner, why would I give 3 acres of my land to a party which has never won a single case? So this is a puzzle. Were there some political forces at work? We cannot. What was the compulsion? And that Seva Sangh has never come forward to explain their compulsion. So this is a real mystery for which I have no answer. And my sole source is the plea filed by Vishnu Jain.
We will wait for events to unfold in the courts, which will obviously happen at their own pace. But there is another development that you write about, which some of us or most of us would have read about, that for many years, over the last 30 years or so, courts have refused to get into this debate, citing the 1991 Act. But in March of 2021, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the validity of this act.
That is a very significant development, but we don't know when the hearings will begin and how long they will take and what will be the verdict of the court. Now, my question is something very different. That I want to know what happened to that 3 acres of land that Katra Keshav Dev gave to Idgah party. Where is that land? Is the present Idgah built on that land? Because Cunningham, in his last report, he said that the Idgah is a dilapidated structure. And in fact, he said, it can be demolished and excavations carried out under it. I've quoted that exact report so that I'm not accused of, misquoting him. So he says that's a dilapidated structure. But the point is that the present structure is not dilapidated. So when was it constructed? And what happened to the 3.3 acres that were given? These are very, very important questions. And last thing I want to say, with your permission, this agreement of 1968 was a closely guarded secret. Nobody knew about it. What happened was that after the demolition of the Babri Masjid, in 1993, namaz began to be offered on a daily basis at Mathura. So some people complained to the court in Mathura that till now namaz was offered twice a year. Now, why is it being allowed every day? This obviously was some kind of gesture to placate sentiments. And in reply, the UP government then told the court that there is an agreement in 1968. Till that time, nobody knew about the agreement. So it is a mystery wrapped in a puzzle or in an enigma or what. It raises many questions which I don't have any knowledge of. I can only raise those questions.
This is fascinating beyond doubt. So Meenakshi ji, in short, there are a few questions that have come in from our viewers. But in short, this is yet another stunning achievement on your part. As you said, very, very humbly, as you said, that you have not added anything new. All of this is available in primary records going back. But we are on our own incapable of going through, digging all these records. We do not have that training or that knowledge. So thanks have to go to you for building and presenting all these facts before us. And I would be remiss if I were not to include Aryan Publishers in the stellar job that they have done in supporting all of your books right from Rama and Ayodhya, and this is the 5th book with them. And I must add to anyone who is who's going to go get this book, this is a stupendously, lavishly produced book. Also, the physical aspects of it, it's a hardcover book. The paper is very thick. It's not going to decay anytime soon. And it's got more than 100 color photographs printed on glossy paper. I mean, if you wanted a collector's edition, this is it, not only for the content, but also for the quality of production.
I have to say something in the role that Aryan Books International has played in my intellectual journey. They have stood by me at a time when nobody was willing to stand by me. And they have taken great pains to make sure that every book is, it's the best that they could do. And I'll always be grateful to them for the role they have played in my journey. They're so happy to take any suggestion that I have. They don't worry about the pictures, the cost going up or anything. They say, you give whatever you want.
Absolutely. And I can, having read, and I have all the books that you have written that have been published by Aryan Books, I can vouch for your statements. These are incredibly, lavish productions. So one question that has come from Surya Narayan Satish is that, are there any archaeological excavations going on in Mathura now?
At that site, no. Because at the site where the temple is and where the Eidgah is, nothing is going on. The two structures are standing there.
One person asks, we don't have his name, can't the illegal transfer of 3 acres of land be declared null and void as it was done by an organization who had no locus standi?
Now this is where the court comes in. First of all, we have to know why this agreement was done in 1968. The representative that Seva Sangh have to come and answer in court. And then what? I mean, they have to explain, and only then the court can decide what to do or what not to do. This is not for you and me to settle, These are very, very complex issues. They become very complicated because a lot of the truth is hidden from us even today. We don't know the complete picture. As I said, I only know till the creation of the trust by Jugal Kishore Birla. After that, I'm as much in the dark as anyone else. Whatever little knowledge is there only because of Vishnu Jain case that he has filed.
Absolutely. There's one question by Manisha Manohar who asks, can we confirm that Bet Dwarka is indeed the fabled Dwarka of Vasudeva Krishna?
No, right now I cannot confirm. Excavations are going on, but I cannot confirm that.
I would suggest to Manisha Manohar and anyone who's interested, there's a series of excavations between 1985 and 1989 that were conducted by Shri S.R. Rao, who was the Director General of the ASI at the time. He has written at least a few books on it, including, well, okay, if you go to my blog, you can find a review of that book, and the evidence presented is indeed compelling. But as Meenakshi ji says, excavations are still going on, but I would strongly encourage you to read what Shri S.R. Rao had to say.
He has also written on Lothal.
He was, in fact, the archaeologist who first excavated Lothal after independence.
Yes, exactly.
I believe there's one more question. This is also related to Dwarka. So again, I think as Meenakshi ji has answered that, you can go and look at the publications of the ASI and what the Shri S.R. Rao had to write about it. So Meenakshi ji, before I close for our viewers, we will put this this recording, this Q&A, in a couple of days on YouTube on our channel, so you can go and watch this recording, where we also have prior recordings of our interviews and author interactions. I would strongly request all of you to please follow our Twitter handle at Indica Books. We have a Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/Indic Book Club. And please do support our initiatives. We have 1,000 Reviewers Club that has been going on, and we keep sending out books to people who are interested. We will be sending out copies of Meenakshi ji's book, Vasudeva, Krishna and Mathura, to a few people. We have procured a few copies from the publisher. And do talk about the book, read the book, share your opinions about the book with people, because between opinion and fact, let facts speak for themselves. Opinions anyone can have, but this book does a human, stellar service on bringing out everything that we, has been written about Vasudeva Krishna. One final question is Meenakshi ji on Twitter?
Actually, I hate to answer this question. I was not on Twitter till about a week ago. Then somebody did this Twitter Spaces, and for that with me, and for that they had to create a Twitter account for me. So they created that Twitter account, and I was alarmed and frightened to find 7,000 people following me. So I don't want to be on Twitter because, if you're doing academic work, you require full-time concentration. So I'm just going to, my decision is to let that account be, but I don't think I'm going to be actually operating it.
I think it makes absolute sense. I think Twitter is one of the most efficient devices created to waste time. So let people like me and the rest spend time on Twitter. Let Meenakshi ji, do her research and writing. So in short, while she is on Twitter, she's not active on Twitter. So don't, if you tweet to her, don't expect a response, is I think what we can say.
Yes, sorry.
Meenakshi ji, on behalf of Indica and Indica Books, again, a very, very grateful thanks to you for writing this book and for coming online to answer our questions.
Thank you so much, Abhinav, and thank you, Indica. And thank you for all the people who tweeted. Sorry, who tuned in. I'm now getting frightened of Twitter. So thank you so much, all those who tuned in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.